Hello everyone, glad you could make it today. In this video, we'll be continuing to look at Grassley Defense Systems mobile suits with the Beguir Pente, a development of the Beguir which was featured in the Witch from Mercury prologue. The Beguir was one of the first witch kits I've built, so it'll be interesting to see how I feel about the Beguir series of suits after building quite a few kits in this lineup. So, let's get to work. Just like the previous Grassley suit, the Mecha, this kit has some really nice box art. I'm loving the bright colors. Inside are 5 runners for the mobile suit itself, with 2 smaller ones in clear plastic for the light purple areas on the kit, and a stand for the shield. You get some wire, a beam saber part, and a sheet of stickers. Out of all the witch kits I built so far, the Pente has the most stickers, those being used for all the green Antidot parts on the shield and backpack. Build-wise, the mobile suit itself isn't anything special, although it is simple and quick. It's a good choice for newer builders in that way. It's not bad at all, just that there are kits in the lineup that overshadow it with more articulation and gimmicks. A lot is shared with the Beguir since the differences are very minor and just cosmetic. If you haven't built the Beguir but built the Mecha, this is also going to feel very similar since it is in essence a slightly smaller Mecha. What sets this kit apart from the Beguir, and the only reason why I'd prioritize this kit over the Beguir, is that shield. If you were to buy this kit for the shield, I wouldn't blame you. It's a really neat assembly. The shield has bits on the top that slide forwards and backwards to reveal the Antidot emitters. The backpack also has parts that slide in and out for Antidot, but the shield really is the highlight. Overall, I think the kit does its job. It holds up the standard to be expected of this line, even if it is a bit simple, especially if you compare to something like the Aerial. Although I wouldn't go out of my way to pick up another one, I've come to like this mobile suit more and more as time progresses. The large shield reminds me of Evangelion, and although I'm not giving this kit an Ava themed paint job, I definitely could down the line. It'd make for a cool video, but let's start painting. I primed with Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500 black, and then sprayed some Tamiya TS40 metallic black. I'm using some Mr. Metal Color iron on all the areas where I'll keep the metallic look. This is primarily the frame areas, but I'll also keep it on some of the outer bits where I want contrast with the main color. Mr. Metal Color is my favorite lineup of metallic paints. They require no thinner, dry really fast, as close to instant as you can get, and have a super realistic metallic sheen, which you can actually enhance by polishing the paint surface. In the anime, the Beguir Pente is seen used by Grassley's top pilots alongside the Mecha, so I wanted to build off that idea. My Mecha was painted like a knight, so I want the Pente to feel like a royal guard. This rich purple is perfect and works much better with this concept than the lighter shade seen in the anime. The paint is from Vallejo's Game Color line, and it was a great introduction to that line. The coverage was great and went on super smooth, only taking 2 coats to fully cover the metallic undercoat as opposed to my usual 4. That being said, it may have something to do with how dark the metallic is already. The paint also has a richness which I don't have a substitute for in model color. I also realized the purple makes this color scheme not the most unique ever, but I like it. I don't have a lot of kits painted in purple, and I'm trying to use as many different colors in this build series. It also dries faster than model color, but because it is a little glossy when dry, I did allow for some extra cure time just in case. That being said, this purple is very dark. So dark, it might get confused with the metallic black underneath it, which is something to keep in mind for later. As usual, the brush I use is a number 5 round. It's a size large enough to cover most areas with ease, but the pointed tip allows for some pretty precise work. I won't need it for this particular project, but I can achieve some pretty fine color separation using this brush without masking. It just takes little experience to do so, as well as the confidence that comes with said experience. I'm going to paint some areas gold, so to prepare for this, I'm using red as an undercoat. This red is unexpectedly transparent and very glossy, so painting it was a little concerning. but with some patience and letting the paint dry fully, it's doable. I really had to build this color up, but since it's just an undercoat, I wasn't taking an obnoxious amount of time for some relatively small areas. I could have used my usual red from Model Color, but I have this paint on hand, and I didn't want to let it go to waste. Now I can paint the gold using gold acrylic ink. I chose areas that mimic the gold on the Michaelis, but the placement isn't an exact copy. This is of course due to the Pente being a different suit, but also because of the Pente's role in the Witch from Mercury anime. It's used by Grassley's top pilots, but not by Shadiq Zinelli himself, which is why I use less gold on the actual mobile suit. This just makes sense in my head. I do use a lot of it on the shield though. For the most part, I've just been replacing the red areas on the original color scheme with the gold, but I'm really going all out here. The panel lines on the shield gave me a perfect border to work up to without having to mask. This ink is pretty much perfect when it comes to the tone, having an iridescent quality due to having mica particles, but it can be tricky to actually paint. Compared to your typical paint, there's much less work time where you can move this stuff around. So to work around this issue, I'm using shorter brush strokes with stippling motions, just so I'm not disturbing any fresh ink. The result is a mottled, almost cloudy effect which creates a weathered appearance. I'm sure you could get a more even result if you adjusted things, but I like how it turned out. I'm painting the head sensor and all the other areas that go under the clear parts, starting with some silver ink. This one also has mica particles which give it a holographic effect. Unlike the gold, you have more time to work with the silver, which is much needed due to the areas I'm painting. These areas have a curved teardrop shape, where the gold areas were large and flat. In the past, I've always put a transparent color over the silver, but this time I want to see what it's like mixing the ink with paint. I'm using a lighter purple with a lot of red tones, which makes it almost look pink. I really like the look. Mixing the paint does take away a little bit of that holographic effect, but the mixture still is bright with the metallic sheen. It definitely gives me a lot more possibilities to work with metallic colors where I don't have a transparent color available. I'm adding decals as usual from G Rework. There are a lot of them in this set, possibly the most out of any other Witch from Mercury set I've used so far, and the Beguir series is on the smaller end. This is mostly because of that large shield, which has some nice striping on the edges. G Rework always does a good job with their decals in terms of graphic design, breaking up the plain surfaces of these witch kits. The smaller caution sign type markings were really easy to work with, but the larger ones, pretty much everything that weren't those caution markings, seemed kind of tacky and wouldn't move around as easily. Probably due to me not spraying a clear coat beforehand. I really should have, but I had a limited time to work on this kit and tried to reduce things to the bare essentials. This did make the decal process frustrating in some parts, but if I was doing this without any recording equipment in the way, it wouldn't have been as bad. You just have to be a lot more intentional with how you work. It's also worth noting that these decals are numbered, but there isn't an instruction guide on the G Rework website, so I'm working based off the product images on said website. It's of course doable, but there are a lot of similar looking decals in this set. This made the process take a lot longer. I had to take a break, where I'm usually able to just sit down and knock out an entire set of decals in one setting. I let the decals dry for a day, and now I'm using a fresh hobby knife to chip them up. I usually only wait several hours, so I'll heavily brush on some decal softener before chipping. The thought process behind this was that if the decals were too dry, large portions of the decals would flake off, and I would have less variety in chipping size. Chipping the decals is as simple as it sounds, using my hobby knife to scrape along the decals until I get a result I like. I am trying to give a sense of directionality with these chips, but more often than not, I'll just work based off what I think looks good. Whenever I show physical chipping, I also show it on the paintwork, but there was so little contrast between the metallic black and the purple, the chipping is barely seen. I really have to hold the kit up to the light just to see it in person. I definitely should have used that iron all over the entire kit, not just the areas that remain in that lighter metallic. An area where that metallic black did provide some contrast was on the gold. I'm mostly scraping at the edges just because the patchier nature of the gold already provides some visual interest. If it was more or less flat, I'd do more chipping on those surface faces. In some of my past videos, the contrast between metallic undercoat and main color is on the lower end, so whenever the project is done, the chipping can get lost if you view the build from a distance. On this one, the chipping was lost from the beginning. Quite disappointing, but it is what it is. I sprayed a coat of Mr. Hobby's premium gloss top coat, and it's time for a pin wash. The pin wash is pretty essential, using fake shadows to show off all the details and make a kit more three-dimensional. This pin wash was a little tricky to apply just because of how dark the purple is, but when it dried, it had a nice subtle effect. Using black is a good choice for darker colors like this purple, but would provide too much contrast and look harsh on something really light like white, at least according to me. I use a 12/0 brush, which I've chosen because of its small size for obvious reasons, as well as its short length. I prefer a brush that's short because less paint can get loaded on it in the first place. As a result, if I do miss a detail and hit the outer surfaces, not a lot of paint is there and I have less to clean up. Less paint to clean up means less risk of removing the wash from a detail it's supposed to be in, and depending on where that small bit is, I'll leave it there since it can be interpreted as an oil spill or weathering. It's, all about making your paint work for you, even if it's not intended. I let the pin wash dry for a few hours and I'll be adding speckling. I usually go with a dark brown, but I wanted to try something a little different and use gray for a more faded look instead of just dirty. Because I don't have the right shade of gray in a wash, I had to use a normal acrylic, which is where I made a big mistake. In past videos, I've talked about how I like weathering with washes because they don't dry as quickly as normal acrylics. I was given a bit of a reminder of how quickly that is. The shield turned out just how I wanted. Overall, very subtle, with a few gray specks to break up the large areas of purple. But on the body, the paint dried so quickly that I wasn't able to streak enough of it down and blend the effect. I did try to scrape some of the dried specks off when they fully dried, but I had to accept the look. It does seem pretty harsh when I'm looking at the kit close up or in photos, but this kit is going to be on a shelf several feet away from me and surrounded by other witch kits, so it isn't that bad, but compared to everything else I've done so far, there is a very big difference. The final part to work on are all the green parts on the shield and backpack for the Antidot emitters. I'll start off by painting the areas in that silver ink I used earlier. After 2 coats of that, I'll paint on Fluorescent Green. I've used this paint a lot in past videos and in general for good reason. I like the shade of green and the paint dries semi-transparent, so it allows the silver underneath to shine through and has the appearance of tinted glass. But one thing I've forgotten to mention is how it stays glossy, even after a flat top coat. This of course keeps that tinted glass look, but also can provide some contrast whenever it's paired with a flat coat. Speaking of top coats, I'll end things with Mr. Hobby's premium semi-gloss top coat, and when that dries, the kit is done. Here's the kit in the bare plastic, and here it is with a little work. And I'll be honest, it isn't a stretch to say that this isn't my best work. It's a mixture of not having enough contrast for certain effects, and having too much contrast with others, and is proof that even someone like me messes things up. I do like how the shield turned out, which seems fitting since the shield is really what makes this. If the rest of the kit turned out like the shield did, I would have had something really cool, especially when paired with the Mecha. I think it shows that this was the first thing I've painted in over a month, but I digress. Next in the series is a kit that has much more going for it than just a cool shield, the Zwart. Pile technology has received very little representation so far in the build series, and the Zwart is a design which has a lot of potential, and minor spoiler alert, it's one of my favorite kits from this entire lineup. As usual, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next video, whenever that is.